My father was born in Thurles, in Tipperary. From what I know about his father was a bit of a ne'er-do-well. That is to say, he came from a wealthy family. My grandmother, my father's mother, was a Stuart Scot, and therefore in lineage she descended from the Buccleuch family in Scotland. But he seems to have taken off and left her fairly early in life after giving her 2 children, my father and his sister. My father's mother must have been reasonably well off because she lived in a large house on the common, on the old common at Chislehurst in Kent. Her father, Emil Hecht, my other grandfather, came from Bratislava in Moravia when he was about 18 years old, which would be in the sort of 1860s, 70s. He came to London, and he had an introduction to a friend who was in the city of London, and then he decided to set up his own business, in the business of buttons and bows. And although it sounds silly, it became a very large and thriving business, because in those days women wore very elegant clothes which needed lots of buttons and bows. And he became a very rich man. When I was born, I was born in St. John's Wood, and we lived in the road leading down from the army barracks there. And the army barracks housed, in those days, and still does, the King's Troop of the Royal Horse Artillery, who are the chaps who go to Hyde Park, and you see them on television firing the royal salutes. And my father was in charge of that battery when I was there, commanded that battery. He had served in the Second World War, in the First World War, I beg your pardon. He had been wounded, and he'd suffered some gassy, which was very common, which was very bad for people. Well, my father was a very nice man. He was, unfortunately, a very uncommunicative man. I think he found it difficult to communicate, but he was a nice and kind man. I was born in 1920, and soon after that, he retired from the army. I left school when I was 17. I didn't go to university then. I wanted to be a newspaper man. I just had that feeling. And I started by working for a local newspaper in Hampstead. And then I discovered I could make money by sending stories when I saw things to the Evening Standard. And I did quite well at that. Through my association with Fleet Street, I joined the 332nd Company of the Royal Engineers, which was anti-aircraft defense. I joined them in 1938. It was great fun, a great giggle. The company was made up almost entirely of people from Fleet Street. We were called up in 1938 when the Munich crisis was on, because they didn't know what was going to happen. We went out to Baldock in Essex. There we were stuck in a field with our searchlight, and we had a couple of old cars, and we used to ride around the neighborhood with shotguns. Like, you know, these old cars had enormous wings on either side. So one chap lay on each wing with a shotgun, and we went shooting the sitting birds, the pheasants, just before the season, which was very illegal, you see. And the only other thing I distinguished myself there was that at night we had to stand sentry duty, and there was a password, a challenge and a password. And sometime early in the early hours of the morning, I saw something moving, and I challenged, and I got no reply, and I challenged again, and I challenged 3 times, and then I fired. I hit a cow up the arse. I had to live that down for a while. We went back, and everything was okay again. But then in 1939 we were called off again.
The government's final warning to Hitler has been ignored, and a state of war once more exists between Great Britain and Germany.
And I worked as an ordinary soldier, territorial, on the searchlights. And eventually, I think it was my uncle had a cousin who was a general who commanded the anti-aircraft defences around the east coast of England, the Humber. And he sent for me to be on his staff. And so they made me a sergeant. And I went through a bomb disposal course, learning how to, when you got an unexploded bomb, how to make it safe. Very dangerous business. If I'd been older, I never would have done it. The Germans dropped a lot of mines in the Humber area, and we used to have to get them and make them safe. But I decided after a while that it was altogether too dangerous. When the general, the friend of my uncle, suggested I ought to go for my commission, I went for my commission. And I was sent down to officers' training centre down in Kent. There I went through my training. It was rather sort of disjointed because at that time the Battle of Britain had started.
The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war.
We had constant German aircraft coming over and bombing the airfields around us, and then going on later to bomb London. And I remember once I had bad toothache, and I had to go to the dentist on the back of a small army truck. And as we were going along, some German came down and machine gunned us. So we all dived over the truck into the bushings. And of course we had our anti-aircraft defences there. We also had the Spitfire squadrons who shot down a lot of the Germans. And it was quite an exciting time, really.
Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty. So bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its commonwealths last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
I was commissioned into the Royal Norfolks, and I was sent to Norfolk, joined the 4th Battalion, and became an officer. And then we were sent to a place called Stobbs Camp, which was in the southern uplands of Scotland, not far from Jedburgh and the castle of Jedburgh. That had been an old German prison camp during the First World War. It was a pretty cold and rugged place, but we did a lot of marching up through the hills of Scotland, the southern uplands of Scotland, to toughen us up. When we were finished there, we were sent to Liverpool, where we shipped onto British ships. And we sailed across the North Atlantic with an escort and no particular bother, and arrived in Halifax in Nova Scotia. And the next thing we knew was that we were being loaded onto American transports. My division headquarters and my brigade went on to the converted American liner, the Manhattan, renamed the Wakefield, the USS Wakefield. We didn't really know what was going on, but we left there, the whole division in several ships, escorted by the aircraft carrier Lexington, 3 heavy cruisers, 6 light cruisers, and half a dozen destroyers, which is an enormous escort. And we sailed down to Trinidad. And we weren't allowed to go ashore at Trinidad. All the American sailors were allowed to go, but I'd been working for the general staff, for the division staff, since we'd been on board. First of all, they discovered that as I had experience in Fleet Street, I could do the daily news program for the ship. So I was doing that on the intercom. And out of that, we organized some concerts with other people's help. But when we got there, the general was very upset because American ships are dry, and he was a Welsh guardsman. And his name was Beckwith-Smith. Wonderful chap. He was the most incoherent man I know, except when he was when we were in battle, and he was absolutely clear as a bell. But he said to me, "Look, I want you to go ashore, Quin, and I want you to go to the British naval base, and I want you to bring back something that looks like an upright piano that is full of cases of Scotch whiskey," which I did. And I might say that when I got back to the naval base, to the docks where I was supposed to get on to the boat going to the American ships, because the American sailors had gone ashore and they'd all got on the local rum, and they were coming back absolutely plastered, and the shore patrol was having a great time with them. But thank God nobody asked me what was in my upright piano, otherwise I'd be in real trouble. But I got back there, and I think I earned the general's eternal gratitude, because he was well off for whiskey for some time. I think I even was given a bottle, although I didn't drink a great deal of spirits in those days because I was 21. And we sailed on, and we sailed down the South Atlantic, and every so often they would have anti-aircraft and anti-submarine drill, and all these ships were armed with 3-inch guns, all sorts of things that were fairly old that the Americans had put on them. And when we had these drills, they'd let off with everything. And it was very frightening. The noise was terrific, and the machine guns going and so on, you know. But you felt a bit reassured afterwards that you got some defense. We sailed from Port of Spain down the South Atlantic to, and you must remember that at this point America wasn't even in the war. America came in the war 2 days before we arrived in Cape Town. And when we arrived in Cape Town, we all went ashore. And since I've been working, I didn't have to suffer all the route marching and drills that the others did. And the South Africans were very friendly. I was met by a beautiful girl in a lovely car, and she took me off and took good care of me the whole time I was there. And I even met Field Marshal Smuts, which was very nice, you know, because he was a very famous character. And I had a wonderful time. I don't remember too much of it, because I was either in bed or plastered. Then we got on board again, and we sailed off again, and we went round, very interesting, we went round the Cape of Good Hope, which was a considerable experience. And we sailed up to Mombasa, where we stopped. The original intention had been to send us and we were equipped to go to the desert, to the Middle East. But somewhere, probably in Mombasa, the orders were changed and we were sent to Bombay, where we got off our ships and we were entrained and went up to the fighting vehicle school in the Deccan. It was a big British Army centre. And we spent the winter of 41 there. I mean, my most interesting experience as a 21-year-old sub-lieutenant in the Army was I found that I was required by law, Army law, to have 5 servants. I had a bearer, who was a marvellous chap. He was a Punjabi, a old Punjab regiment with a huge, wonderful moustache, you know? Twice the man I ever been. And I had a chowdhury guard, that's a night watchman. I had a sais for my non-existent horses, and 2 beasties, the water carriers. And we sailed off again, this time to Singapore. And we sailed into Singapore through the Banker Strait. We got bombed by the Japanese, but fortunately they didn't hit us at that time. We got into Singapore and we disembarked. And about 3 hours after we disembarked, our ship was hit by a bomb which went straight through the center of it. The first thing that happened was my platoon was detached and sent to one of the creeks on the east coast of the island. And I found myself put in charge of a dozen naval ratings and about 8 56-footers and 36-footers. Motorboats. And our job was to go out and patrol around that coast, and particularly go and look at the island of Pulau Ubin, which was not too far away, where the Japanese had taken over, which we did. We had to be a bit careful because if we got too close, they shot at us. And I did this for about 10 days, and then we were suddenly packed up and shipped back to the battalion and put in a position on the northwest corner of the famous racecourse on the island, the Bukatima racecourse, which was high up. We had to sight our guns to enfilade the paths below where the Japanese were likely to come, and indeed they came at night. They were so noisy, they were very bad at night, the Japanese, that we used to shoot them up and do a lot of damage. But then, of course, the Australians who were defending that end of the north end of the island failed to stop the Japanese getting through. I don't know the true story of it, but when the Japanese got through, we were all evacuated and brought back. And I have a memory of having a firefight in a pineapple plantation and trying to get at a Japanese machine gunner whom I couldn't quite get at. And then he started shooting much too close to me, and I fell back into a banana plant. I can tell you that's one of the most painful things that ever happened to me. And then somebody came along and said, they're going through the white flag and the island's being surrendered. And we were then marched off, and we were moved to a small house on a cricket pitch. Then we waited until we were given orders. We stayed there. We got some rations. We managed to sky for some food, and eventually we were ordered to get on into metal rice trucks and started the long journey up to Bampong and the beginning of the infamous railway. I remember when we arrived in Bampong because it was an interesting place. It was an attractive town, except that the buildings in the centre didn't have any backs to them. And we were put into long huts, which became our typical residence for the rest of our 3.5 years. The huts were made of bamboo poles, and attap covering the roofs, which were quite efficient. And then there was a raised dais on each side with split bamboo slats along it. And it wasn't ideal because there were a great attraction for bed bugs and lice and everything you can think of. And the rats used to lurk in the raft in the roof of the huts. In fact, it was from rat urine that I got my only ever go of jaundice B, which I got there. I didn't know it at the time, and nobody else knew it because nobody had the necessary microscopes, etc., to tell the difference between A or B. But I got over it. We were sent out in parties to go and start building the railway, flattening the ground, putting down the sleepers, putting the sleepers safe and steady, then laying the rails over them.
Hard work?
Very hard work, yes. Very hard work. For a very measly diet, really. I mean, the diet was principally rice. But it wasn't rice like you know it. It was yellow rice. Rice that had been treated with H2SO4, or sulfur, and was originally designed as feed for pigs. But they decided that it was suitable for us. I, fortunately, could always eat it. And since we had Dutch Indies troops in the camps who made these wonderful Dutch, very hot sambals, I could always put down a bowl of rice with a half a teaspoonful of sambal bajak or sambal oelek. And of course we did get, I think our ration was 1/4 ounce of an ounce of vegetables a day as well, and 1/16 of an ounce of meat a day. We did get a little bit of other things, you know. And of course we got a little bit of sugar, very little, a little of salt, very little because it was necessary. And you did the best you could. I mean, I had a little money when I went in and other things, and I used these things to buy duck's eggs, which were plentiful. And everybody, of course, got sick with various things. I had a bit of beriberi once, but I cured it by buying a lot of duck's eggs and stuffing them, because that's the only way to do it. I think probably some of the most devastating of them were when we were bombed by Chennault's Air Force, because the Japanese didn't mark the prison camps and they put them near objectives. So Chennault's B-24s came over, and they more often than not dropped their sighting B-500 bomb plumb in the middle of our camp. And sitting in a slit trench with 500-pounders going off all around you is not a funny experience, because the whole thing goes like that, Another pivotal event was when I was so badly beaten up by a Japanese who I think was mad, who beat me up with a Kinder stick, which is a very hard wood. And that's what caused me to lose the sight of this eye, because I got a hemorrhage in the macular region, which results from serious blows to the head. And there was no reason for it. But then, there were other things like that. We had in one camp, we had a Japanese Gunsa sergeant who had tertiary stage syphilis. Well, in the tertiary stage syphilis, you're mad. You're completely mad and very dangerous. This chap he would come out at some time in the day, draw his sword, cut people's heads off at will, without any cause. Eventually they took him away, because even the Japanese authorities realized that wasn't the right thing to do. I think that one of the most devastating things, we had probably 250,000 Asian laborers from all the countries around, Malaya, Thailand, Indochina, you name it, and Tamils from India even, who were also working on the railway. And they were hit by a cholera epidemic. We managed to get the Japanese to give us some vaccine, and we were able to inoculate our people. But these people, were not organized at all, and they died like flies. This is terrible. At one point, we had to go out in turn. I had to go out with a squad of men and some mepicrin, which is antiseptic. Get the bodies, pile them up, burn them. That's horrible. That's horrible, but it's necessary. Then we got towards the end. Once the railway was built, we had a period of quiet when we were even allowed to play games. We played seven-a-side rugby and things like that. But it wasn't long before Chennault's Air Force came over and bombed what we'd done. And then everybody had to go back and put it up again,
Today is Victory in Europe Day. Advance, Britannia. Long live the cause of freedom. God save the King.
Towards the end, they took all the commissioned officers and they moved them up through Bangkok, across to eastern Thailand, to a place called Nakhon Nayok, which I understand, when literally translated, means the end of everywhere. And we went to this camp. There wasn't anything for us to do. The camp commander and his troops were very brutal to people, and a lot of people got very severely beaten up. I can remember one young American officer from the cruiser Houston being terribly beaten. It was awful, awful. But we were there, and of course we had known from our secret radios what was going on, and so we knew that it was getting towards the end of things. And we'd seen other signs. We'd seen these enormous plane roads, train loads of trucks, rice trucks, coming back from Burma, full of Japanese wounded and dying. Many of them, by the time they got down to Arian, were dead. because the Japanese had no proper medical facilities near their front line. They always kept them right back at base. And it was those who were lucky and survived the trip who could expect to live.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always.
When I went into camp, I had a camera. The camera had belonged to a brother officer of mine who got killed. And I took it because it had some film. And so we took pictures when I first got to, not in Bampong, but when we were in Chung Kai. In Bampong I had contact with, there was a church with Italian Catholic priests, some of whom spoke English. And I managed to send a message out through them to the Evening Standard in London, to the news editor, Ronnie Hyde, where I was. When I got to Chung Kai, we used the camera and we took pictures of conditions, the way men looked and the kind of conditions we lived in and so on. And when we finished with the film, we hadn't got any more, couldn't get any more. So at that time, I did some work for a team who were running a secret radio. My job was simply to disseminate news and to get the torch batteries, because the radio ran off out of a little tin with torch batteries. And I had touch with a chap called Nai Li Sung. Nai Li Sung was a Thai Chinese who supplied the camps. And he was also a member of the Allied Underground, V-Force. And he supplied me with batteries, just as he supplied us with medicines which we needed, and all sorts of things. And he took my camera, and I said to him, well, look, it's no good anymore, but he took my name and address as the Evening Standard in London. And years after the war, at the end of the war, I tried to find out what had happened to him. I was told he'd been killed, he'd been caught by the Japanese. So I went home, I had no further. And in 1950, he sent the camera back to the Evening Standard, addressed to me. Very typical of the Chinese. The Chinese are very honorable people. What I had to say about the prison camps was reported in most of the newspapers, and the Evening Standard had me do a really big story, because that was the paper I worked for before the war. I realized that I hadn't lost any of my so-called journalistic ability through being in a prison camp, and I didn't feel too bad at all. I felt in pretty good shape. As a result of all these things, I got offered a job on the Daily Mail, and so I went to work for them. I had to go, first of all, see the army and get demobbed. I went and got my suit of clothes and the various things they gave you on being demobbed, and I was looked at by the doctors because I'd come out of a prison camp. And they looked at me and they said, well, you don't seem to be in too bad shape compared with some of these people we've seen out there. We think you'll probably live till you're 60. So I collected whatever it was I got. I think it was some gratuity, not very much, and the clothes free, and off I went. Hello.
Make your teeth come out.
Yeah. You want to see them come out?
Yeah. Take them out. Then I saw your teeth come out.
No, only teeth. Teeth.
Do they come out? No, they didn't come out. That's the silliest thing I've ever heard, Winston.
It's real, Dad. I saw it.
They won't come out.
Let's try.
You can't. Can you get them out?
Here, why don't you try and get them out, Winston?
Come on.
Kids can't really take them
Softly.
out. I do. Then try. Just try, okay?
You want me to try?
I saw you.
Go on, try, Dad. Try one. Go on, try one. Watch, Winston.
Okay. Did you see his teeth come out?